Hey, everybody. We're here, alive and thrive, in the most culturally diverse city in the world, Toronto, Canada, home of Blue Jays, Raptors, Maple Leafs, and Canadian psychic Robert Lindsy Milne. And that's me. Welcome to my side of the crystal ball. We've got a great show for you tonight. It's really exciting. Debra Lynne Katz is the main event, and she's also on the expert chair, just one guest. And my goodness, does she ever have a lot to say. Debra Lynne Katz is the founder of the International School of Clairvoyance. She is a remote viewer, actually like a high-level, high-ranked remote viewer, channeler, psychic, intuitive. She has a Ph.D. in psychology, as well as a master's in sociology. She has several books and articles and videos. This person is a very accomplished and dynamic individual, and one of the most exciting people I've ever interviewed. Before we start, though, I've got a couple of requests. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. It's really important. We really need your help on this. If you subscribe, and incidentally, subscriptions are complimentary or free. That just gives us higher ratings. Or if you comment or like, it gets us more attention, higher ratings, and that way we can just keep on doing my side of the crystal ball. So please do that. And you can also find us on Apple, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere else you're listening to your podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with me personally, you can find me at www.robertlindsymilne.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, as well as my side of the crystal ball. And just before we start, I'm going to tell you that we've also got a WWRS tonight. It's pretty fascinating. And here we go. We psychics, intuitives, people that work with energy, we all have our style. We all have our specialties. My specialty in many ways is behavior. I'm fascinated by the way people think and behave and things like that. And to a degree in my teachings, I'm a behavioralist. Let's take a look at your behavior, see what you're doing, and are you getting what you want and with the behavior that you have. So that's been my therapeutic way of thinking, and not necessarily always my psychic way, although I am psychologically minded. I believe that when understanding ourselves, we can then rise to higher spiritual levels as well. One leads to the other. So I'm like to talk today about a behavior, a resistance behavior. We humans just hate having to change. We like things consistent and stable. We have our routines, we have patterns, we have ways of doing things, and we like doing them, or mostly we like to do them. Nevertheless, we have patterns and routines, whether it be in a job, whether it be in a family, whether it be in a sporting event, we all have patterns and routines. When we're forced into a situation where we have to change, we don't like that. We feel out of control. And a behavior that we often do, depending upon our maturity, is something called the 3R cycle. And by the way, the 3R cycle isn't reading, writing, and arithmetic. 3R cycle is resist, resent, revenge. So we don't like to have to change. So when we are put in a position, whether it be our spouse that wants to change, or whether it be a boss, whether it be a government, whether it be doesn't matter. When we are put in a position of change, we can fall into this pattern. So the first part is resent. you start to, you just feel angry or irritated about it. You're resentful. Why are you making me do this? I don't want to do this. And that's the feelings that we have. That's step one. That's the first R. The second R is resent. So not only do we resist the change, we then start getting resentful, and we start maybe doing lesser on the job. Maybe our attitude changes. We become and behave in negative ways. So we become quite resentful. And then the piece de resistance of this process is then we find our revenge. If we want a job, what we'll do is we'll cost the company more money, or if we're in a relationship, we'll do things that will be more difficult for that other person. And the 3R cycle is often done when we're caught off guard or when we're tired. And the 3R cycle is a way of, we think, is staying the same. When we become more mature, we realize that there's growth in change. Change has to happen. And when we open our minds to that, we become more aware and more spiritual, more evolved. And above all, we also become more kind. And that's what Robert has to say. Debra, well, first of all, thank you for joining me on my side of the crystal ball. I've done some reading about you, and I've followed your career, and I am really impressed with what you've done. I also instinctively know you're just getting started as well. What gave you the insight that you're psychic or intuitive? Were you a child when it happened?
Yeah, well, I had an identical twin sister. I have a twin sister. And so we would have different psychic experiences as very young girls. And we didn't really have words for it initially, but we knew that something was happening and there was a lot more going on than could be seen with the, physical eye. Or we would see things physically, like apparitions in the house that other people weren't seeing. So all of this was very
operations. What you mean?
Apparitions. So
I know what you said. I was just your accent. I just had a little trouble with. Okay, now I know what you're saying. Apparitions.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I thought you said operations.
Oh. No, so we would see a figure standing in my parents' bedroom doorway, but I would see it for quite a long time without telling her, and then she shared that she saw the same thing, and we were oftentimes feeling each other's emotions and hearing each other's thoughts, to the point that it was almost hard to get a word out without her first saying what I was going to say, and vice versa. So this was just all part of our daily experience. And then at a young age, she somehow got a subscription to the Theosophical Society library around the age of 11 or so. So we started getting esoteric books sent to us. And, we couldn't understand most of what was being said, but a little bit enough to know that if you wanted to develop this further, you could meditate and pray and be the best person you could be in your life. And so, yeah, that's pretty much how it started. But I really never imagined that I would be able to call forth information at will, that I could sit down and do a reading for someone. Like, that was something I was told by a psychic that was something I would be doing. When I got into college, I went to a psychic fair, and a woman told me that I would be doing what she did someday. And I just thought she was not a real psychic, because how could that be true?
Sure.
So it really wasn't until I came across training schools, and namely the Berkeley Psychic Institute in Northern California, when I was working as a probation officer around the age of 27 or so. That's when I started to do my training, that I realized that, yes, this is something that not only I could do, but lots of people could do.
You also have an impressive education. Do you realize that you're one of the most well-educated people in the world?
It's funny you say that, because I thank you for saying that. I don't know if it's in the world, but I think I come from a background where my mother had a couple master's degrees,
Sure.
and so I
So
appreciate.
you just hang out with people that are well educated. That's all. But to have a PhD makes you at the top of the most well-educated people in the world. You are in. You got a piece of paper that says it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it took me 5 years to get that one. So, I'm still settling into that. I just graduated. I actually just went through my graduation ceremony in December. So
really? Oh, well, congratulations. Wow.
So I'm just coming out of the trauma of it all, and the state of mind of, why the heck did I do this when I didn't really have to do this? And
because it was there.
Any time in my life where I've started to feel a little bored has been not a good situation. It's always dangerous when I'm bored, and I can tell probably that's the same thing for yourself. But usually my response is, to do something like go back to school, move across the world, or something crazy.
What has anyone called you doctor yet?
Yes.
What's that like? Was that cool? Come on.
It's sometimes cool, but also, people, my friends like to call me Dr.Debra, or, there's pros and cons to it. I've actually had some people be somewhat negative about it. Like, I was on someone else's podcast, actually with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, who I totally adore. And I was on his show, and then he put it up on YouTube, and there were some comments. And one of the comments to him was, well, can't you just get like normal people on your show? Like, not, all these people, who are have these high degrees, and we want just some normal people. And when I saw that comment, I was so shocked, because I thought, well, how I'm the most normal person in the world, right? So I think my perception of myself is, I'm a normal person who gets bored easily, and has just spent a lot of time in school.
You're a normal person who's really intelligent. And when I look at you at this young age in life, and you're 20 years younger than me, and you've just completed your doctorate degree. That's an impressive accomplishment, considering I completed grade 8 and 2 years in grade 7, and that's the farthest that I went in school. And I see your accomplishment, and I go, wow. Please don't let anybody rain on your parade.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that very much.
Very few people just fluke a PhD. And usually people just like work really hard for it.
Yeah. Well, there's, I look at, you could be highly educated academically or highly educated through life, and that's
absolutely. But the point is that this is the way you've been doing it, and you've done really, really well. And the way I did it, well, I did it in a different way. And I'm really proud of that too. I'm just impressed with how well you've done. Now, so you mentioned just before we started talking, that while you're aware and intuitive and sensing things and connecting with other people, you didn't start doing readings until you were about 30?
Mhm.
How
Yes.
did that happen?
Yeah, well, basically, I went to school to learn how to do it. And I didn't even know when I was taking classes that, ultimately I would end up doing readings. I just heard that you could take a class and learn just how to be psychic, basically. And, it wasn't like I went thinking, oh, I'm going to become a professional psychic. It was just anything having to do with these topics was so exciting to me. In fact, I heard that this one school had a clairvoyant program where people were just doing psychic stuff. And I didn't even look at the description of the class. I signed up for a year-long program without even having the slightest idea what it was about. And they just stuck me into a reading with a bunch of people. And right away, I was having images and visuals, and I had no idea what they meant. That took several months before any meaning came with my visuals, but I was just having so much
Excuse
fun.
me. So when you were giving people information from your visuals, your perceptions, you didn't know what you were saying, but the other people were shaking their head. Is that right?
Correct. And
Okay.
also the process that I learned in was a group reading experience. So I
Okay.
was not the only reader.
Okay.
It was called reading in a line, and you'd be with, anywhere from 2 to sometimes 10 readers. And so I would share what I got. And yes, definitely many times the people said that they understood exactly what I was, talking about. Like one time I saw an image of the woman in front of us, and she had this purse, and this guy came up and grabbed her purse and took something out of it. And it turned out that her husband had just like taken her purse and taken something out, and they had this big argument about it, like right before she came into the reading. So it was things like that where
Can
thinking
so,
back to it.
excuse me for a minute. So when you say you saw it, did you actually see it visually, or was that you knew it, or you had the thoughts of it? Which one was it for you? Or was it something
It was,
out different again?
yeah, it was visually. So an image of a purse being open, like watching a movie, but
Okay.
in
You
less
do, you
picture.
see that then. Wow.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah. And do you also feel like you do that as well?
I just know. And or I sometimes don't know what I'm going to say next. I just speak. So but for me, I often use I see, I hear, but it's just I know.
See, and that's fantastic. So, because I just get the sense as you're talking that, yeah, information is just like really channeling through you. It's
That's
just
what happens.
flowing, and you've learned how to get out of the way, or maybe you're still in there, but it's just flowing through, and you're not stopping it. And I have that too, but it took me longer for that aspect of it. It took me probably doing readings every day or just about every day for several months before I started to get a sense of what, I was talking about, or starting to sometimes have just instant knowings, where I would know what that person's profession was, or I would, have an understanding of a situation where it would just something would kind of land in my mind like this and then explode into just awareness, didn't see it, didn't hear it, would just know it. And then after that, slowly, hearing messages occasionally would come in. But, I do think that since I've now been teaching for over 20 years, and my school is called the International School of Clairvoyance, and for a reason, because clairvoyance is, if we're going to get into specific definitions, it's the specific ability of of accessing information through pictures and images. And I really think, depending on the approach you start with, that you can have more visuals, because I've worked with so many people where they feel energy, they hear information, oftentimes guides, but they say, I don't really see very much. But as soon as I start to lead them through the visuals, and they're required as part of the exercises in class to focus on the visuals, then information starts coming in that way, and things really switch around for them, opening up that clairvoyant ability. And then likewise, I had been doing this work for a long time with the focus on the visual, but when I got into remote viewing, which we might end up talking a little bit about, but when I got into
that, we can talk about that, please.
Yeah. So there's different approaches and techniques, and for remote viewing, it is, at least with controlled remote viewing, it's more working on paper and sketching, and so I had never done that before, because with doing readings for people, I would just close my eyes. I always had my eyes closed and would just sit there not using any tools. So one of the things that I got really excited about and learned was that depending on the tools you're using, such as writing or sketching, that's going to bring about different abilities. And like when we were having our conversation before the interview, and you said that you got started because you were living on the streets when you were just a teenager, and it taught you how to survive. Well, most likely a lot of that had to do with just kind of like your body would know like where to go or who to meet up with right at the exact time.
And I trusted it.
Yeah, and that can happen when you're actually using your body, when you're having to go somewhere, or, to translate with remote viewing, it would be if you're sketching something and you're already writing, and then you find that you sketch in a certain way, or your body's inclined to put something on the paper. And so depending on how you're using your body and what part of your body, that's going to bring about a different form of expression of your intuitive work. So if you only work in one way the whole time, you may not even know. Like if someone had never said to me, start to sketch and start to write things out, I would have never opened up to what I would call my like intrinsic body knowing or somatic expression. So
I'm sorry, nor somatic? What does that mean?
No, somatic.
Oh, somatic. Okay.
Somatic, like of the body. So
okay.
So for example, like let's say in remote viewing, a lot of times the focus isn't so much on people, it's on describing locations and objects. And so for example, one time I was at this conference where we were given a remote viewing task of describing a photograph we were going to see in about 30 minutes from that time on a big screen. And so we were just given a target, like target number 1, you're going to see a photo in 30 minutes. We want you to describe the photo. And so I had visuals of like little square buildings, kind of several of them. And so I sketched them and I was kind of confident about them. I saw square buildings with little triangles on top. And so I sketched that. And it was time to turn in my paper. And actually our mutual friend, Michelle, was with us, and she was with me, and she was sitting next to me. And right as the person came up to take my paper, I grabbed my paper back, and I suddenly had this inclination to take my pen and just start scribbling on the paper. And so I did that. And she looked over at me like, what, are you nuts? Like, why did you just scribble on your paper? And I said, well, I don't know, but I've now been doing this long enough to know that if I have an inclination to do something, even though logically it makes no sense, it looks crazy, I'm going to do it because it probably is going to end up having something to do with the target, in this case, a photograph. And so sure enough, when they showed it to us, the photo was of all these little cabins on a hillside, and there was this very windy road that went in very particular fashion, and it followed exactly the scribbles that I had made from the bottom of the page to the top.
Right.
So it was like an identical rendition of that. So to me, that's an example of unconscious, like it totally bypassed my conscious mind, as opposed to the images of the buildings themselves. While I didn't, in some ways it still is in the unconscious, but then it enters into conscious awareness enough for me to recognize, oh, I'm having an image of a building. So these are like two different psychic abilities coming about at once. But if I hadn't had the paper there, and also the urge to put that down, I wouldn't have gotten it correct to put in that road, the picture of the road.
That's really fascinating. And I'm just dying to say something. So I do it differently. And I've been a performing psychic. So I appeared on radio and TV shows around the world. And my MO is when somebody calls a show, the station, they tell me their first name and where they're calling from. And I ask people, have a question, write it down, but don't ask it. So the person comes on, they tell me their first name, where they're calling from, and I just start talking. Now, in the early days, when I was doing that and asking people to, tell me the first name, where they're calling from, and have a question, but don't ask it, I would have a piece of paper and a pen, and I would just sort of start scribbling. And then all of a sudden, oh, hi, Mary. Yes, thanks a lot. And by the way, what was that big hole in the garage house? How did that happen? Just by scribbling on the piece of paper. And from that point on, I would then get all the more thoughts, and I would stop writing. So the type of, and on when I kind of made my comeback out of retirement, I was on with Michelle's gonna get mad at me. It was on one of her shows. It's on the East Coast.
Was it Get with Gail?
No, it was Tim was the host, is the host.
Oh, was it Midnight in the Desert?
Thank you. That's right. It was Midnight in the Desert. And I was on that show, and we started taking calls, and I hadn't done them for years. I'd been a little rusty. So this one guy calls up, and it's near the end, and he tells me his name, where he's calling from, and I say a couple of little things, and then I say to him, I just need to ask this question: do you live in a house, or do you live in like a small apartment building? And he said, I live in a small apartment building. And I said, if you were standing in front of that building, facing the front, on your left-hand side, at the top, halfway down, it looks like there's been some water damage happened right smack dab in the middle. And the guy's just freaked. And he said, that happened last week. The roof caved in right there. Now, I didn't see it, but I said I saw it. I just knew it. And there were times when I would do similar things where someone would call in, tell me their first name, and say, okay, so now remember, my prime was in the 80s. That was when I was at my peak. And it was different then. So people still had their phones connected to the wall. So somebody would call up and, first name, tell me where you're calling from. And I'd say, okay, so you're in your living room right now. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Holding the phone with your left hand? Yes. And there's a table in front of you? Yes. Put your right hand in front of the table, move it to your right, down a little. Is that where the table got burned? Yes. And I would do those things. And that's actually what.
But you're saying that you're not seeing those things, but I don't know. Are you sure you're not? And maybe you're just how you're defining seeing. Like, because for you to.
And I've found bodies. again, similar, but didn't necessarily see them. I just knew.
But when you described something in relation to something else, like you're saying it's below your hand to the left, there's a burn mark.
Right.
Are you sure you're not getting any image, even if it's like the most vaguest imagery? Are you sure you're not getting any imagery? Because even
well, sometimes I do, but it's exaggerated.
Mhm.
I was involved with helping a guy. He had contracted the world's most potent super virus, and it was 100% antibiotic resistant. That meant when you get it, you die. And he got it. And his wife, who is an epidemiologist and a client of mine, I had a part of helping her find the cure, and she did. I had a mental link with, I can talk about it because it's in a book. I had a psychic mental link with Tom, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 8 months. And he was in a coma. And I knew what was going on with him. I knew what was going on in his body. I knew when he was in trouble. I knew when he was okay. And when I would see something in his body, it would be like really exaggerated. And I would describe something by a color, but I wouldn't know why I would be saying that color. But it would be, but the color would have something to do with like a rotten pancreas or something. And I was sensing it.
Wow. Yeah, and that makes sense because a lot of, especially if you're tuned in energetically, you'll oftentimes see colors first.
Yeah.
And then from there you'll get more advanced information. But that's really interesting that you were linked with him so intently. What was that like for you?
I
Was
lived it
that
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And also I was Stephanie, his partner, his wife. I was also her support during that time. And this was a project that scientists around the world came together and found the cure to this incurable disease. And they found it in 8 months, just as Tom was dying. And I spent every day for that 8 months living what Tom was going through.
Oh my God.
And it took me more than a year to get through it, because I had so many injuries after doing that, because as I said, I lived it 24/7, and wow. I knew what was going on with him all the time.
That would be really intense and probably something we typically recommend for most people not to do. But were you glad that you had done that, or did you feel like the well, obviously he lived, but yeah, what about the repercussions of it? What would you say to people who say, oh, should I do that with my loved one?
I would do it again, and I have done it in a heartbeat. I wasn't the star of that show. There were other people that had a bigger role. But there were 3 different times when Tom was in a crisis. He was unconscious in a crisis, and had a psychic not been involved, he would have died. And there was one time, so I created a vision in my mind, how I knew his energy would be okay. I thought of a candle, and when the candle was strong, I knew he was okay. And when the candle would flicker, I knew there would be problems. And there was this one point, he'd been medevac to Germany. Everyone around him was in hazmat suits. He was isolated. He didn't know what was going on. He was really sick, and he was hallucinating and in a coma. and the flame was flickering and it was going to go out. And I told Stephanie, I said, Tom needs to see his daughters. Yesterday would have been a good day. Today's a good day. Tomorrow's not so good. If you wait longer, don't bother. And that night, the girls flew over from Los Angeles to Germany. And when they got there, Tom's energy changed. And I knew they had got there because the flame got strong again. And that's how I knew that's how I knew they had arrived. And Tom talks about it in the book, and how he was getting ready to let go, and then all of a sudden his daughters arrived.
Wow.
So,
you know, what's amazing to me is even that you were able to, you know, have that connection, or that you were able to help, but just that you would have that commitment and that intensive desire moment after moment, day after day, to stay with someone on that level. And I think that that is what would set you aside from just about anybody I know, to have that level of self sacrifice for so long. That's very
I've helped many people complete their life, and in the exact same way I helped Tom live with a woman in the last year. And so she was dying of cancer, and I had a mental link with her. And this was during the time of the lockdown. And she would get locked in the hospital. She couldn't be around her family or and I had a mental link with her. And when she was in panic mode, we were connected, and I helped her calm down. And I was on board 24/7.
Wow. That's really amazing. And did you find any effects on your own, like, health or mental?
Yeah, it drained the hell out of me. You know, and when she died, it took me a while to get over. I've helped several people complete their life like that. It just sort of happens, and it's a choice. But it's a choice, and for me, I just do it.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And when the people pass on, do you feel like you usually know right when they've gone? Do you have a feeling
I can
of
feel
it?
it. Oh, I know it. I know when they've completed their life. Yeah, it's just empty, and when that completion happens, it's just an empty space, and that's how it goes on.
Yeah.
I didn't actually choose to do these things; they just kind of started happening.
Well, I'm sure. Do you sometimes feel just like overwhelmed with the amount of people that need help? And I mean, because there's so many sick people, dying people, people with just so much need. How would you say that you've handled that over the years?
I've been really strong. I've got a lot, right? Like I'm so, and I have huge energy. Even when I'm sick, I have lots of energy. So I'm not sure what the question was, but your story's more interesting than mine, though.
I don't think so.
Oh yes, it is. Oh yes, it is. And you know, someday we can talk about my story, but I want to know more about you right now. So
Sure.
So as a private person, an individual with an evolved mind, an advanced mind, highly spiritually evolved being, how does that affect you in your personal life?
Well, I don't know how, well, I would say that, personally, I'm very sensitive, and um, for me, honesty is very important, and also being understood is very important. And occasionally I find myself in situations where people will misinterpret something that I say or I do, and and so when they think that I or they assert that I had different intentions than I actually did, and maybe they genuinely think that, or maybe they're saying that, but it's very hard for me to just be okay with that. So I would say that
So it's difficult to feel good about yourself when there's negative energy sent towards you. Is that
yeah,
what you said?
yes, I would
Well, I
say.
hate it too.
Yeah. And it's challenging. I mean, I think I've gotten better with creating some boundaries. So it's been very hard to be able to just let other people have their emotions and me have my emotions, because I'll immediately channel their emotions, and meet them
Wow.
on that level. So and in some ways it's kind of cool, because now I'm at the point where the moment my energy changes, I'm very aware of it. So, if it even drops a tiny bit, it's like, oh, it just dropped. It's like musical notes, right? So like you could tell, even if did it just drop one note? Did it drop 3 notes? Did it, plummet all the way down there? Years ago, I wouldn't really be as aware of what was going on. I would just suddenly know, like, one moment I'm in a great space, which is really my typical, normally I'm
Sure.
feeling pretty darn, happy and
Yeah.
excited about life. And then suddenly, I'm like in the depths of despair, and, what's going on here? And so now I can much better tell what's going on, and that something brought me down or even something brought me up. But it took a long time to get that awareness, and then to be able to create some boundaries, and that's part of what I teach now too, because you tend to be attracted to people, or they're attracted to you, who have those similar issues. And probably just about anybody that is, what does it mean to be psychically open? You're open on every level, on a body level, emotional, sensing level. So I'd say, that also makes you, more empathic and knowing what people are going through and things like that. But, and then there's also not everybody is on a path of wanting to get insights into themselves, and wanting to grow and learn, or admit, like, oh well, I've got some issues here I need to work through. So one of the things that I feel so blessed about is that I teach several classes where the people who come into my classes are at the forefront of people wanting to develop every aspect of themselves, or maybe many aspects. And so that is very cathartic to me, that I actually have people that want help developing on all these different levels, and are open to that. And whereas in other aspects of my life, I run into people who aren't like that, and that's when it becomes really challenging, is being in relationship or communication with people like that. And of course,
How does your awareness, clearly evolved? How does that affect you in close, intimate relationships, or love relationships? Is that a plus or a negative, or both?
well, I don't want to say I'm always right, but
But
a
a
lot of
lot of the
times,
times.
yeah, and I would. Now, hopefully my husband cannot hear me speaking right now. He might disagree, but there's just so many times where I know what's going to happen. I
Yes.
can see it. I know there's going to be a problem. I know, like just even the other day, he has this big construction job going on and he needed to get it all covered up before it rained. And all news reports were saying it's not going to rain until later in the day. And I was just, I told him the night before, I feel like it's going to rain much earlier. And I even dreamed it was going to rain in the morning, but he just didn't listen to me. And so, the rain is coming down and he's rushing around to get things covered and all frantic. And it's just like, I told you this, but I find that especially with men, especially with older men, maybe, or even my same age men, but they, and I don't know if they're like this with each other, but they tend to be more dismissive of me, and I don't know if it's as a woman, as, what it is, but a lot of times they're just dismissive. And then we have to go through this whole thing that I'm trying to avoid. And then it turns out exactly what I was saying, comes to play out. And I had that happen with 3 different groups of people I'm working with just this week alone.
Do you get smug about it? Yeah.
I don't get smug. I get frustrated
Because
there's lost time. If people would just listen to me and go along with what I said to begin with, we could get so much more done and we could be so much more efficient and not waste our time. So I don't want to be right. I just want to get things done and I don't want to waste time. And we're just all over the place. There's so many cool things to do and so much that needs to get done in every area. And I don't want to be slowed down for a second. And that's what's happening to me. I feel like I'm in a session right now more so than an interview, but I appreciate the question. So yeah, it's just, it is, I think, a frustration that I've had since even just a little kid. And it probably goes back to my issues with my father where, I would see something and he would just ignore it. And, so it's like just sometimes feeling like a little voice in the wilderness, yelling out like, hey, pay attention, the tree is about to fall. And, these voices say, no, it's not going to fall. It's, it's got good roots. There's no reason for it. And yeah, I would say that's probably one of my, lifelong frustrations.
Sometimes I get smug when I give somebody information. Well, not a client, but friends. I get smug when I tell them something is going to happen and they ignore me and it happens. And I am kind of smug about it.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, sometimes, well, especially if someone is just straight out saying you're wrong. Like even I've had people where they wanted help looking for a lost object. And I told them, well, I see it in the back seat of your car. And
well, it couldn't be there.
No, it couldn't be there. I wasn't there. And, or even they look there and then sure enough, it is right there. So
right. Well, I get smug about that. One of my favorite ones all time was a friend of mine from South Africa came over he wanted to see what it was like in Canada. And he joined me when I was on tour. And we were driving from Edmonton to Calgary. And then we were going to go into the Rocky Mountains and, have our vacation there. And as we were getting to Calgary, he said, I've come all this way. And by the way, you're frozen. No, that's too bad. So you're frozen.
Yeah, my internet is a little bit
slow. So as we're driving down to Calgary, he said, Robert, because I had a radio show to do and some readings to do in Calgary, and then we were going to do the tour in the Rocky Mountains. And he said, I've been thinking, I've come all this way. Maybe I'm just going to rent a car and I'm going to go into the mountains and then I'll come back when you're finished work. And I just said, That's a bad idea, man. Why don't you just stick around Calgary? I'm going to be doing the show. I know lots of people at the station. We'll have a party every night, and then we'll hit the road. No. I just got to go to the mountains by myself. The next morning, I drove him to the car rental place, and I'm saying, you really don't need to do this, and we can have a lot of fun here. He's just got to do it. So now we get to the, he's filling out the forms, and he gets to the insurance part. And I said, take the most amount. And no, I said, take the most amount. And he said, oh okay. And I said, now, Clive, you don't need to go. And I really think you should stay. No, I just got to do this. And I said, okay, it's up to you, but I don't think you should go. Anyway, he did. The next night, in the middle of the night, there was a knock on my suite, and I knew who it was. And I just said, who is it? And he said, you know who the hell it is. Open the door. He had gotten into an accident on the Trans-Canada Highway, and the car was a complete write-off. I was smug about that. Laughed.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. You remind me of Ingo Swann. Did you ever meet him, or do you know?
I've never heard of him.
About Ingo Swann? He's really the father of remote viewing. He's the one who coined that term. Yeah. I really think you and him have a lot in common. He's no longer alive, but if he would have maybe been, I'm not sure what year he was born, but
I was in 1949.
49. He would have maybe been a little bit older, but yeah, you should really do some research into him.
What is it that reminds you?
You look a little bit like him.
Oh, yeah.
He was very talented psychic, though he didn't do readings for people. He really used his psychic abilities in research settings.
Sure.
So he really, like, when you hear about remote viewing and the military programs and everything,
he designed
a lot of it really started with him in conjunction with working with some other researchers. But he was an artist. He was very sociable, very just a very eclectic in his interests. And yeah, there's just something about your energy. And I studied his archives for a number of years. That they ended up being located at the school I just got my Ph.D. at. So I would go every week to his archives and spend time with all his letters and memos and files and things like that. So I didn't know him in person, but just really got to experience kind of his essence, so to speak.
Is your work your calling?
I would say definitely. I say it is because I'm obsessed with it. There's I do a lot of different things, but at the core of just about everything, it's almost always having something to do with psychic work, spiritual work. So, I look at more my obsession and my enthusiasm for this than, even that I'm doing the work itself. I think that when we're really so fascinated by something, that's really what our calling is.
What would you like your life to be seen as when you've completed it? What would you like people to be saying, or what would you like your contribution to have been?
Well,
We're probably about 50 years away from that, of course, but.
Of course. Well, I would like people to know what they are capable of. And what I learned about myself is that sometimes you don't know what you're capable of until much later in life, and until someone else, shows you the way, or gives you whether techniques or lessons or practice opportunities to be able to do those things. And I was talking about Ingo Swann a few minutes ago, and in one of his, I think it was in his autobiography, he was saying that he saw everything came down to opportunities in his life, that it was being
Absolutely.
opportunities and circumstances, the circumstances one finds themselves in, just like you were saying, if you
Absolutely.
hadn't been out on the streets, if you hadn't been in certain places, you wouldn't
Absolutely.
have
No
gotten.
question about it.
Yeah. And so that's what I try to do for other people is, one is open them up to that. Maybe there's more to their minds and themselves and their lives than they realize, and then give them some tools or opportunities to discover that. And, my hope is that at some point enough people will realize that. And I do think this is starting to happen, although it's a little bit, I could be biased because I'm kind of at a point in my life where I'm surrounded by so many psychic people and so many people in these, now I'm kind of in this bubble where, to me, this is almost how everyone is. And occasionally I talk to, someone, a normal person, and they're like, well, no, this isn't how it is for everybody. But yeah. I've just been, now working for myself for so long. But yeah, my hope is that eventually it becomes saturated enough so that we could say, at least in, the Western world, where there needs to be more openness to this, that it really, has saturated awareness. And that's my hope, that I contributed to that in some way.
Is this a gift or a talent?
I would say it's a skill.
Yes.
It's a skill, and
I love it so far.
Can you be talented at that skill?
Isn't it?
Yeah, I think, some people, I think it's an art, in some of my books, one of my books I have the art of clairvoyant reading. In another book, I have the art and science of predicting future outcomes. And so these words, art, science, I think those are, it's how you apply them. And so to me, it's more, I think what's more of a gift is having the ability to be disciplined and focused and, push yourself. And I think that's missing in some people. And I think that's where I get frustrated too,
You say it differently than me, but much nicer and classier. but I have to, I have a talent, a skill, and I worked my ass off to make it a good skill. That's where I come from. And the harder I worked and the more dedicated and committed I was, the better I got.
Yes, exactly. It's like any craft or trade, you
Absolutely.
have to work at
Absolutely.
it.
Right.
And you have to go at it from different angles. And, if you hit a roadblock or you get defeated or something, you have to pull yourself up. Absolutely. And, and especially when, someone's standing there to, cut you down or doubt, what you did or whatever. And there's always going to be, whether they're, out of competition or just, they're channeling some lower vibration. And, but it's just needing to pull yourself up and say, Michelle taught me the expression, you have to put on your little girl pants or your big girl pants.
Big girl pants, yeah.
Put on your big girl pants and, get over this. And there are a lot of very psychic people. They're highly, highly sensitive. A lot of them ended up in my classes, and some just don't have, the internal strength to push themselves, not just even in this area, but
or in
in
anything.
other areas, and sometimes they don't have to. I think like when you're born into a situation where you're not wealthy, where you're maybe poor, or you've got things to overcome, you have no choice if you want to survive but to push yourself. And I used to think about that, like, what if I had been born into wealth or into a situation where, in my teenage years, if my parents had been able to buy me, or had been, able or unwilling to buy me a house, or just, to make things easier. And I didn't have that. So I always had to be doing something to, survive and be improving myself. What if I didn't have that, but had been born into riches, or had found, a great guy who could, support me my whole life? Things might have been different. I don't know. So,
well, they would have been different, and you would have been different. We light workers, I think you're a light worker, or, we who do this work, we don't descend down from the heavens. We fight our way out of hell.
wow, that's a great way to put it.
Right. So that was true. Is what happens.
Yeah, or at least rising up from the ashes.
And doing this work, we often go through more stuff than most people. And we carry more weight or load than what most people do.
I think a lot gets projected onto us, and then also living in some ways as marginalized people.
Yes.
In some ways I say, like, psychics are some of the most discriminated against
Absolutely.
people. And, I hesitate in saying that. I mean, I'm Jewish, so, I know how much Jewish people, and of course, people of color, have suffered. At this time, though, someone's really marginalized when the group isn't even currently identified as, you wouldn't in this day and age just openly, unless you're a white supremacist, say something, highly negative, or laugh at, a Black person or a Jewish person, or, but it still is okay to do that with someone who is a, practicing psychic, or, is saying that they've just, seen a, some kind of spirit in front of them, or had an experience. It's still okay to laugh at them. Even I've had credit card processing companies, like when I went over to a new website platform, get in touch with me and say they were denying me or going to give me a higher rate because of
because you're a psychic,
work that I do, even though I've had, I've been in business for myself now for 15 years, and very strongly, mostly doing online or phone work. So a lot of my payments come in through online payment processing portals. And I've probably had maybe, like, out of, thousands of clients, maybe, 2 want refunds, out of all that. So, I am not like this, psychic hotline business where maybe a lot of people are, trying to get their money back, and all anyone needs to do is look at that. So to be told, no, we're not gonna, like, we don't even want to take your money because of what you do, that is discrimination,
Sure is.
outright.
Absolutely.
And of course, so many people were burned as witches, burned,
Absolutely.
like 1 million during the Crusades. So
Absolutely.
I'd like to think it's getting a little bit better.
It's a lot better. It's a lot better than what it was. We, in the days of the tea room, we couldn't even talk about it. My father, he just died last August. My father told me throughout my life that he would go to his grave believing his only son was a fraud and a charlatan.
Oh my gosh.
And he did too. And he also said I was the only guy he ever met that never had a job, and that was not a compliment. So we have been discriminated against. You have, I have been, but it's getting better now, and we are becoming more respect. And it's because of people that are making accomplishments like yours. That's why I made such a big deal about it at the beginning. It's your types of accomplishments. And when I started, you did it in a back alleyway. It was like, get a tea leaf reading and an abortion from the guy across the road. It was like that. That it was in, and now it's mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that,
because of work like you did, what I've done.
Well, I have over the last several years been seeing a difference, even with people who come into my classes. I have a clairvoyant class right now with about 28 students in it. It's a 12-week online class. And we did introductions this week. We didn't get to everyone in the first week, but we have a medical doctor. We have a university professor, researcher. We have another woman is a psychologist. We have a nurse. There are so many people who have very valid jobs and valid in terms
of course
how society sees them. And also I did a formal project recently with Professor Dr. Patrizio Tresoldi out of Italy, and our project was called the Remote Viewing Survey, and we surveyed over 100 professional remote viewers. And when we asked them what their careers were, again, it just ran the gamut. We had a couple of surgeons, we had engineers, financial advisors, architect, just about everybody had, these very professional jobs.
Absolutely.
And, I think to get to the level of professional, maybe it's one thing to just dabble in this, but, like we were saying before, it does take like people who have an intellect and, can be disciplined with themselves and know how to communicate well. So all these professional skills really do come together with the psychic aspect.
Absolutely.
To be helpful.
If you were going to share something with my listeners, what would you like to say? Besides all the wonderful words of wisdom and jewels you've been sharing with us, like what one thing would you like to leave us with?
Yeah, I would say to, believe in yourselves, to, believe in your own internal experiences that, when you, and just trust that when something's coming in, if you just have a thought that kind of appeared out of nowhere, or you have, a feeling about something, even if it doesn't make logical sense, to just go with it and follow through with it, and then see where that takes you, and not that you're going to be right about everything that comes in, but just, trusting more. And that does require, it requires faith, and it requires, just trusting that you can take steps forward in your life, even if you don't know where you're headed. Sometimes you've got to just keep walking down a path, and what's at the end of the path will not make any sense until you're actually there. And I think that's what's going to be required for all of us, because right now it really feels like we're in a time where, whatever was written before isn't there anymore. There's anything could happen. And so, we need to just keep stepping forward and listen to, what's in our hearts and what our souls and dreams are telling us. I think that, right now, that's going to be the strongest thing for people, the strongest guidepost.
How do people get in touch with you if somebody wants to take a course? Or I know I think that you're still doing readings for people as well. I think there's a big lineup for that, but you're still doing readings for people. So how do
Yes,
they find you, or how do
yes,
we find you?
they could come to my website. So
Yes.
DebraKatz.com,
Yep.
DebraKatz.com, or letter U, letter R, psychic.com, and just go to my website and you can get in touch with me through the contact form and look at our different offerings.
I have enjoyed talking with you. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been very inspiring, and I just appreciate all of your support and kind words.
Let's do it again sometime. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Well, that brings us to the end of another great show. I told you it was going to be a fascinating one. My thanks to my guest tonight, Debra Lynne Katz, for such a wonderful interview, and also being such a wonderful interviewer with me too. She just got some information out of me that was just so impressive. So just before we say goodbye, I've just got a couple of more requests. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you get and listen to your podcast. I'm asking you to do this. Subscribe, like, and comment, because we need your help. I need your help. The more you comment, or if you subscribe, if you're not yet, it gives us higher ratings. The higher the ratings, the more successful and the longer we can have the show on the air. So please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to try and find me personally, because good old Robert's still doing readings and such, you can find me on my website at www.robertlindsaymilne.com. You can also find me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And now, just before I say goodbye, please remember, do good, stay safe, and above all, just be kind. Good night, everybody.